to the cloud.
This meeting is being recorded.
Got it. Is that Michael DeSabato's nose?
I will start this.
All right. So, Chris, you want to? Oh, nice background there. Chris, you want to try sharing your screen and verify that that works?
Actually, I sent you a message. Can you share my slides by any chance? I shared the slides with you.
I don't have them in a form that's particularly useful.
Right. So do the intro, and I will go off camera for a minute and get the sharing working on this device here.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll go ahead and there's no reason to do the intro because it's still 45 seconds before start time. So
right.
What I do need to do is stop sharing my screen so we can verify that it works. Hello, Kara. Nice to see you again or hear from you again. I don't believe I've ever actually seen you. So.
Good to be here.
There you go. Good to see you. Not in uniform today. Is this a casual Wednesday?
Pretty nice.
Fair enough. For those of you who don't know, Kara's going to be presenting next month. We'll go into that before long. Okay, well, we're pretty much on time and people are getting ready to start.
That seemed to work on the sharing side, Fred.
I don't see it shared yet. Just if you press the magic button, it might work. I don't know.
Go ahead. I will get this working in the meantime.
Oh, well, I can't share while you're sharing because Zoom doesn't let you do that, right? So we still have some people coming in, so we'll give them a minute or three to come in. And while they're doing that, I will share my screen. Chris, if you want to email me the slides in PDF form or something, I can try sharing them that way. Or are they only on the Google Drive?
They're just in Google Docs at the moment, but stop sharing.
Oh, there you go. That looked like something was being shared.
I think that does work now, so hang on 1 second.
All right, so I'm going to share the intro, and then we'll share your screen after a moment. Let's just allow this. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, you'll be able to see it when I can see it. Well, I can't see it yet. Can you guys see the shared screen yet?
I don't.
All right, I'll stop
Nope.
sharing and start again.
Reboot. Turn it off and turn it back on again. We're still at that point.
There you go. It worked that time.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah. Welcome to the IPA Brown Bag. This is our IPA member monthly meeting. Here's the agenda for the day. I have an announcement to make, but I have to go pull it up on the screen to make the proper announcement. Here it is. Or that was the wrong one. Here we go. This here we go. On Tuesday, July 23rd, there will be an IPA members only social event. The topic will be assessing the effectiveness of influence campaigns, one of the most challenging and critical aspects of our business. It's collaboration with a couple of companies. There's an event and a panel and interest. It's going to be in Reston, Virginia, and it'll be out on the what do you call it? The Magic Communications collaboration platform that we use, Slack, I guess, the Slack channel. We'll have the announcements, and not exactly coincidentally, the same or very closely related subject will be next Wednesday, July 17th, at our Brown Bag. So a week before that other event, we'll have influence operations impact assessments. We'll come back to that with Major Kara Masick. I hope I pronounced it properly, who is a 14F USAF. You know, used to be that 4F was somebody that couldn't get in the military. Now 14F is a major, I guess, right? In a special operations group. I'm not really sure of the details. So having gone through that, I'm going to go and introduce Chris now. And then he's going to talk for 25 to 35 to 65 to 85 minutes, however long he talks, and we'll discuss it. So Chris does a lot of stuff, and he's done a lot of stuff throughout the course of his career. He is the CEO, I guess, of Agaterra Electric Boat Company, where he makes and lives on the boats that he makes. So he actually makes them as he lives on them. So that's fascinating. He's also a guru in SBOM, software bill of materials. Works with Cybeats, helping to deal with those issues. Works with TechStrong. He has I guess it's at least weekly show. So it's a TV show with the TechStrong gang. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. He also works with me at Management Analytics as a trusted advisor, and the et cetera means he does all sorts of other stuff. So he's a busy guy. He's going to talk about social media influence in the elections. And the reason he knows about this is because done it, and he'll tell you about some of his experience in doing this. In particular, focused on the Obama campaign, but also what happened before and what happened after. At least I hope that's what he's going to talk about. And so he's going to discuss the path from there to here and where we are now, and the inevitability curve associated with the logical progression going forward of how elections are going to be impacted, I will say, by social media. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Chris can share his screen.
In theory.
There you go. That's Chris.
Sports are
long-haired hippie type, whatever guy.
Whatever. So you should
Oh,
be
that looks
seeing my
wonderful.
phone.
Oh, nice. Yeah, your phone actually works well for that. Good.
Sometimes the tech works. So, okay, so as Fred said, I'm going to talk today about social media influence in elections in general and try to follow us on that path. This image has absolutely nothing to do with the topic, but I figured it's a stressful topic, so we may as well have something decent to look at in the meantime. In looking at this chronologically from my perspective, leading up to 2008, I got involved with cybersecurity in the early 90s, about 91, 92. And that image up there in the upper right is the borderware firewall server in the middle. And in those days, we were talking about borders and walls, how do we keep things separated? And I'll talk a little bit later about my progression in the views of this, and I think how that applies today. But Fred had mentioned one of my favorite terms. Inevitability curve is a term I came up with in that era to convince my boss, that my idea for a firewall, we should turn it into a product. Because if you take the present and you look at a future, let's assume we're correct, and then in 30 years, everybody on the world's on the internet, and to be clear, they are now. There's a line that connects those two. Multiple lines, but whatever you're looking at, there'll be adoption bumps and dips and valleys, and our job, as a company, would be to figure those out in advance and get ahead of them. And it's a recurrent theme to the point that I have, as Fred mentioned, with TechStrong. TechStrong Gang is a series they have multiple times a week that I'm quite often on. The Inevitability Curve is a show I'm working on with them. We have an early episode with Casey Ellis, who recorded RSA, that will be out shortly. But this narrative that we've been somewhere, we're here right now, which means that you can't literally predict the future, but you can rule things out, right? What's in front of us, we're not going to be that, not going to be that, not in the momentum and direction we're going. So anyway, they'll talk about a whole lot, and yeah, the whole .com era, lessons I learned around the turn of the century. I ran the firewall team for Cisco, where we took a soon to be end of life product, fixed firewall, and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar monstrosity. By figuring out that this is all about economics, right? If I can lower your cost and increase your competitiveness by making more secure, then I can sell security. And then moved into the sort of paying attention stage of it. After the firewall era, I co-founded a SIM company with some Cisco friends, and a couple of us wrote a book on the topic at the time. But looking at this, if we're paying attention, not just building walls, if we have surveillance and so forth, what does that even mean? So SIM systems, security information, it started in the mid 2000s, a company called Lofty Perch to look at critical infrastructure visibility, OT monitoring, and that sort of thing. And then into information sharing with ISACs and threat intelligence and all that good stuff. So in 2008, the Obama Rapid Response Team was a system of 4,000 volunteer groups that, as far as I can tell, spontaneously generated because of the differences between the large political campaigns at the time. And the Obama, as the underdogs, more in the Democratic primary. So perhaps talk about that a little bit here, but then in the general election. But you could log into the mybarackobama.com site and start writing blogs and creating teams and joining teams and finding teams and whatever you want to do, with the kind of things you'd expect in social media today, but didn't really exist in the outside world at the time. And with the Clinton and the John McCain websites, and still to this day, you watch the large political parties tend to have these websites that look like they did in 2008, where you can log in and donate money. And if you're really lucky and you have a really good pitch and you can find out where to put it, then maybe some paid staffer at some point will talk to you. So with Obama Rapid Response, it was mostly a bunch of mailing lists of people who were involved with the rapid response in various ways. So the ORR, the Obama Rapid Response core team, was, I think, maybe 150 people on the mailing list, and the usual couple dozen, doing all the talking. But there was, ORR for demographic issues, topic issues for West Virginia, for Western U.S., for international, Canada, all these groups. They were just individuals who had an interest in this. There were, media news junkies of some sort or the other, and we allowed us to do things. Like I'll talk about in a moment, my experience, but work through micro-targeting journalists, basically, right? Saying that the Tarleton, West Virginia Obama Rapid Response Team is 3 retired folks who personally know the journalist and bug them all the time with comments and questions and so forth. Anyways, they already have a relationship. So if on aggregate, we can find a message that works and try to get that into the print media, so it can be leveraged from there to achieve things at larger scales. That was, a lot of the leverage we were using those times, and taking that with a macro strategy. So the core group would watch, and my friends would watch all the things going on and try to find the message. What's working out in the field, what's not. A very dynamic, very interesting thing. That at the bottom you see a link there. I'm happy to share these slides. There's a podcast Kelvin Squire and I did 10 years later on looking back at that, right? And we're in the Cambridge Analytica era at that time. So during the primaries in 2008, I thought, as an example, the Texas fight would be interesting to talk through, right? Because at that time we had this now insurgent, Obama volunteer structure, this new form of social media based form going against the established Democratic National Committee and all the expected momentums that were in play at that time. So it was really a very good, very practical experiment with open versus closed systems, right? And again, in all of this, I'm not particularly picking on any of these, political organizations. They are what they are, but they're settled in. They know what works. They've been through cycles and cycles and cycles, and they can look back across, the history of things. Those sort of organizations don't adapt, rapidly in times, obviously. And the well-fed cats, right? So in my experience, it was early. I clearly did not start.
Est-ce que je peux aller me promener un petit peu? T'as pas besoin de moi?
Non, ça va.
Ça va aller?
Ouais,
Bon,
tu ramènes ton historique.
Oui.
We've got someone unmuted. We can find those buttons. So, but so I didn't found these groups, but I joined the core team, and there was very early in the campaign. I always think about most people can remember back then the candidate Barack Obama had made some poorly worded recorded statement about 8 o'clock in one evening, And I forget exactly what the issue but was. Most people remember one about clinging to guns and Bibles and religion, right? In times of stress or something like that. But it wasn't that. It was something before that. So the example I use is it just sounded like he said, so just something awful, something terrible, right? I like to eat cats, right? So late at night, for those of us obsessing with the news and media and all this going on, we saw this story come up. I'm like, oh God, I hope nobody picks up on that because that's not really what he meant to say. And sure enough, by the morning news, it's all over CNN, it's everywhere. Wolf Blitzer and John King, doing the numbers, standing there saying, all right, so overnight, many of you starting to hear, this, Barack Obama in this one event said he really actually enjoys eating cats, and that's not playing well with the American public, and looks like this, suddenly rising star is probably not going to be the thing. And we'll go back to what we expected with the John McCain and Hillary Clinton show. And all day long it played out. And in the Obama rapid response core team, the mailing list was just on fire. People were going, no, he didn't mean to say that. He meant to say blah, 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 blah. And I was fairly new to it, right? And I finally just wanted to see what, how this stuff worked. But I finally said, what he meant to say was, quote, I like to see well-fed cats, end quote. Some particular sentence of words. And Lisa Owens, who is the organizing power behind this, said, that'll work. We'll push that out to the regional teams, get them out to the other teams. And so this is early morning on the U.S. East Coast. On the West Coast, we managed to get in Washington State. I think it was in the Seattle Post, perhaps. A rapid response team there talked to the journalist, made the pitch. Like, you listen to the clip again, what he really meant to say was, he likes to see well-fed cats, which makes a lot more sense anyways, because actually, seriously, cat eating, it's not a common thing. And wrote an article, and then that got amplified, and we refer that other journalists to that. So that by the 6 o'clock cycle that night, I'm sitting there with multiple screens and monitors watching CNN and getting back to the top of the hour. And you have Wolf Blitzer, John King, and Jack Cafferty sitting on set. And Wolf is sums things up again. Well, it's been a long day. It looks like, the early expectations of the surprise candidate with Barack Obama, probably not what they seem to be. There was this thing he said last night, did not play well. And you go to John King and he looks at the numbers and says, well, yeah, it's true. Cat eating, 98% of the American public are extremely against it. It's a very, less than 1% who actually approve of it. We're kind of surprised we found them in the first place, but there we are. And turn to Jack Cafferty sitting at the desk. And he says, well, yeah, maybe, but unless he meant, and he said my sentence word for word, unless he said, I like to see cats well fed. And the camera rolls around to Wolf Blitzer, who says, well, actually, now that you put it that way, think about the actual clip. That actually makes a lot more sense, right? Frankly, cat eating, right? Really. And by this time, John King pulled up numbers and said, well, actually, that would play in the candidate's favor because turns out, 98% of Americans are really in favor of feeding cats. Even people who don't like cats like to see cats well fed. And then Wolf Blitzer turned to the as scheduled Clinton surrogate. I forget at the time who that was. But obviously, she'd expected to come back on, as has been happening through the news cycle all day long, and say, yes, our candidate, is a big cat lover. In fact, donated a great deal to and spent volunteer time and so forth. But instead, she's faced with Wolf Blitzer saying, well, you heard what we were talking about. Honestly, that just makes a lot more sense. Right? What would your campaign's answer be to that? And effectively, she was like, no, cat eating, seriously. Try to hang on to that last little bit. And as the evening wore on, I could just see this whole narrative fall off the charts. Right? And in Texas, right, in the Texas primaries, there was a particular county right then, and at that time, I could tell you everything there is about the demographics and soccer moms and voting characteristics and so on and so forth. And in fact, the traffic in the Obama network was so intense that night, the servers went down. And I happened to be sitting in a Sarasota coffee shop or cyber coffee shop with a computer. And I went to Google Groups and recreated, I knew the email addresses for most of the people in the core teams and the regional teams and recreated the OR mailing list structure. Got us all back line in real time. And it was a tight race. And it was a very, very interesting that we don't have time for right now, but it was a very interesting night, right? And working all of the channels from getting people in the local teams to call into radio stations and so forth and put forth arguments, and try to inflect conversations. And for the record, again, as far as I can tell, all we were trying to do is tell the truth, right? We're trying to cover anything up. We're just trying to say, this is what we mean to say. How about this argument? Think about it this. Look at it this way, right? And, Obama won that night. And then the election itself comes along. And of course, we have, the beginning of the arc we've seen since then. Interestingly, Steve Bannon started with Breitbart apparently 2 months before I started volunteering with the Obama campaign, but we're all early in the social media era. Sarah Palin was a surprise candidate at the time. I've been a registered Republican myself. But frankly, kind of shocked the way things have gone. And you have John McCain, extremely honorable, respectable candidate, who's not really steerable along these paths, and a VP candidate who very much leans into it. And we saw the results from that. And you see my quote there from Steve Bannon, right? So much of disinformation is just filling up the time to transparency, so you don't have any left, right? Just cover the field with BS, because by the time anybody's done sorting with that, you've achieved your ends anyways. It doesn't matter. Plug the channels. The party unity, my asterisk movement began right at the end of the Democratic primaries. There was a site that I just checked before this called hillaryis44.com that is still up to this day. Last posted in 2016, interestingly, but which claimed to be a group of Hillary Clinton loyalists who were sure that Obama really was a Kenyan, whatever, right? And it was the beginning of the disinformation era. So whether those were sock puppets, people pretending to be, or whether they really were, people who honestly believe all that, right? Because, like probably all of you, I have friends and family who do, and they're good folks, but people who believe a lot of funny things. So what we did in that next era, when we weren't, the upstarts fighting against the embedded, we were, the one side competing with the other one, is take that skill we had and go for the edges, right? You're not going to convince, your crazy Uncle Chris, at Thanksgiving that the sky is in fact blue or whatever. But, elections are actually fought that way, by, not micro-targeting in the sense that I'm going to talk about in a second, but by targeting the demographic edges, right? I mentioned soccer moms. Some of you remember that phrase as being very talked about in 2008, 2016 sort of era. People who will vote either way, like myself. I've been a Republican, Libertarian, Democrat. This is, many people are not fixed in stone, and they can be worked. And we did. We took these same techniques, and look, I think Obama was going to win anyways. I think Clinton would have won. I think it was the Democrats were just going to win that year because of all sorts of other conditions. But I think all of this, helped. There was a landslide. Maybe it would have been less of a landslide, but it worked. And then there was the next day. So the next day, all of us, for my part, and all the some friends from the rapid response team, we stay in contact to this day, and we discuss some of these things. Some of us, continue working on stuff like this, but we basically all went home. We're done. We won. Beautiful day ahead. Achieved our goal. Frankly, pat ourselves on the back and move on. Peter Jukes is an interesting character. He's the co-founder and executive editor of Byline Times, a print newspaper in London. Wasn't part of the rapid response team, but was part of the political blogosphere and wrote an interesting article for Prospect Magazine about the flame wars, the Democratic primary flame wars. So I think it's worth looking at. And still out there on archive.org. AstroTurfing. You may remember that sort of term from that time. The Tea Party. And again, personally, I think a lot of the people you saw on TV, with the Tea Party, movement and so forth, were absolutely sincere. I believed everything they believed. I tend not to, but heck, if they're right, I'm on their side. But, the opportunity to take that and use these sort of mechanisms, to look for the influencers, where we actually know today, and the micro influencers, the people inside groups, they move these people around the edges to get people to vote one way or the other, to get people to think one way or the other. That would really begin to set in. And the Gerasimov doctrine. So Valery Gerasimov, I'd imagine a crowd like this, everybody knows his name. He's still around in the Russian top leadership. The Gerasimov doctrine is literally a doctrine, but as the story goes, which I think is true enough, he pitched to Putin in 2012, hey, give me the resources, to use these mechanisms for political purpose, on the grand scale. And particularly, early times in Syria, exactly, you're not creating problems, with influence campaigns. You can't make everyone want to wear purple if everybody hates purple, but you can recognize that purple is becoming a thing, and these people particularly, right? And influence those to amplify resident themes and so forth. And that worked to exacerbate conditions, and at the same time, in that case and sense, the same folks are working on the same efforts to exacerbate nationalist concerns, and and again, sometimes valid concerns. We have sides on these sort of things, but generally speaking, as again, all of us amongst our friends and family, we have folks who believe in all sorts of things, and some of them are just frankly nuts, but most of them have some sort of point. So you look for those and you resonate those. So fear of loss of identity and culture in European countries is a real thing, and that's a big enough demographic bump to push on to cause resonant structures to shatter and break. Which takes us into the middle of the last decade, right? So Cambridge Analytica, you probably all remember that. I like this image, frankly. I think that's just as simple as it gets. It's early marketing micro-targeting platform, right? So as we look at what we're familiar with today, if I search for anything, I'm going to get ads for that thing right now, which is generally okay, because most things I don't purchase or have any interest in. If I have to see ads, what the heck? Show me something I actually care about. So those tools were fairly early at the time. The technology behind Cambridge Analytica is effectively benign, right? It's woven itself into the infrastructure of the world today. We take it for granted, and without it, we'd actually be a little bit annoyed. But it was used in this purpose, laid on top of, if we take those sort of tools and we take everything else that we're talking about, and it's not, people who are enthusiastically volunteering or being paid, to act certain ways and so forth, or think about things. But you can get right down to, just you're not just having individuals report, who is saying what, where, so you can have counter arguments and so forth. You're processing all the data. And Cambridge Analytica effectively or literally sucked up all of Facebook's user data and used that to support all of its purposes, which were multiple, but you see the Brexit campaigns and the 2000 election, U.S. election campaigns, lots of specific work. It was very effective. And in this case, again, since there was no counter to that, it wasn't like 2008. It's very, very, very effective. And then our own Peter Jukes, of course, sued Facebook over that, and then we got the Cambridge Analytica controversy that we all saw in the media afterwards. So then, February 16th, I'm pretty sure it was the 16th, could have been the 15th. Anyways, the exact middle of February, it just suddenly dawned on me that Donald Trump was going to win. I actually had a moment of maybe that's okay, right? He's not, in my opinion, has any political beliefs, so he'll adapt to the situations and maybe, do some things the way politicians don't. But then, as my view of him evolved pretty rapidly, it seemed that he was going to go down the path that he's gone down since, right? And exacerbate all sorts of problems and exploit problems that concern me, and I don't think are good for society. And it was interesting, I think, to our topic, the reception for my my argument down that path. I chat a lot, to a broad spectrum of folks, and my rock solid Republican friends absolutely refused to believe the idea in early 2016 there was any chance of this guy getting nominated. And once nominated, they were sure they'd lost the election. And but again, here we are. We into this world of alternative facts, when you take tabloid journalism and really push it on massive scale, as has been done, and as Russia and other actors, nefarious actors, Iran. Anyway, we're going all day about what the intensive actors are. The fact is that people have been putting a huge amount of resources into these sorts of campaigns and getting results. Way better, faster, cheaper than other ways. So we get into this whole world. The mechanization of it. I've never remembered this guy's name correctly, and frankly, it pleases me to the punch because I don't care. He died in a plane crash recently after marching on Russia. But he's, one of the key folks in this, had built the team in St. Petersburg as one of the core, large nefarious disinformation act systems, right? Mechanized systems that actually work and not just spontaneous volunteer things like the Obama rapid response team. So now I wanted to take this towards the end, sort of past, a history of where, what we all lived through, and whatever our views on it, some of this probably resonates and sounds kind of familiar, and look at where we're going. Now, as Fred knows as well as anybody, because we debate this exactly all the time, I think that, as we look over long periods of time, I'm talking, many decades, centuries, thousands of years, the future of mankind, we have these issues, that we're still working through over the last several centuries in modern civilization, of what is, is it going to be Star Trek or is it going to be Star Wars? Is the future going to be more and more equitable, good, a nice place to live, or is it going to be more dystopian and basically stay that way forever, or cycle around, and so on and so forth? And so that that classic question, right? What is the impact of the French Revolution? It's too early to tell. We are literally still working this out. It's a very basic philosophical thing, or fundamental thing, that if human beings are intrinsically bad, greedy, sort of horrible creatures, then we probably need authoritarian governments to ever be stable. And if not, we're probably better off, having more open systems, more democratic, all much will. And we're going to find out, because I think the inevitability curve on this one goes down the same sort of economic path I've seen in cybersecurity and other places, right? It's not, don't you think, the Earth really is round? I have a good friend who does not, very bright person as well. So, funny what people believe. And that's not, when we look at this structurally, how do we, as opposed to fighting for a side or whatnot, how do we look for systems that will just be better, faster, cheaper, to live inside, that where these issues are not so much a problem? And as we look at these convincing arguments, it's not, I'd like to know the truth or have better cognitive processes in the general masses or whatnot. We get down to the pragmatic things of, are you sure you wouldn't like to have better customer support, or lower prices, or lower costs, or higher profitability, or better competitiveness, right? That's when the systems, and the funding sources that build the systems that run the world adopt security, or in this case, more broadly, transparency systems. So looking where we've been in cybersecurity, from my perspective, my career, first was internet security. The early 90s, like, well, everybody's going to get it. The internet, hey, we'll do a security thing. Apparently a firewalls and things, so we'll do that, right? And borders and walls and whatnot, structures like that. And then, pretty quickly, into the information security space. And I put Fred's name there because, and I don't mean Fred literally, but in some cases true, but there's a group of people who've been doing this long before me and thinking through these structures. And I mean, when we say long before me, I mean in the cyber age for decades before me. And, this is information warfare, information security has been thought of for all of human history. So we have a base to build from. And then the threat intelligence era, rather the early turn of the century, how do we get information sharing? How do we take, hey, I saw something bad happening, I've got a vulnerability. If I can get that information to other places, whether it's in standard enterprise IT or critical infrastructure, we can better achieve our goals. So we figured some of that out, right? In supply chain right now, right? In the last, Fred had mentioned, software bill of materials is something I've been particularly obsessed with in the last 5 years. Last 2 years, co-chaired the CISA SBOM sharing working group, where we produced a couple of, I think, interesting documents, working with that community to create, spin-off Tiger teams and so forth to work on these issues. But we're very much right now in the information assembly age of that, not just, can I get an information indicator of compromise, a piece of threat intelligence, and can I get your software bill of material, a piece of software inventory information, but can I put it all together? And I think we have structures. I'll I think spend a few minutes talking about one of my favorites is hopefully a good example of this, but I think we have, for lots of reasons, technical structures and many ways policy structures and business continuity and structure, flow structures in place to move this information around. And even without, the advancement in AI, large language models and so forth that we're settling into right now, we'd be in this era where putting this stuff together, is where we go with better security, which again, I think, speaks to our topic here, because to get better security, you need better transparency. You need better time to transparency. You need to spend less time figuring out what's going on, and then you can win, attacking or defending, right? And I firmly believe, that the economic nutrient gradient of the future, continues to go this way. When I say tomorrow's infrastructure needs transparency, I mean needs. I mean, we'll continue to produce artifacts of technology and policy and business processes and so forth that provide a competitive advantage, such that if you don't adopt it, within 3 years, you're probably acquired by your competitor because they've taken 30% of your market share and you've gone bankrupt. Neat, right? And in 2019, with Mehdi Ensari at Unisys, we were both at Unisys at the time, had the two of us, had a conversation about this that led to what you see on the screen, the DBOM.io, the digital bill of materials effort, which ended up being a Lightning Foundation project and is open source out on GitHub now as a open source attestation sharing ecosystem. And I think, yes, I think even specifically into our topic right here, it's worth noting that the word attestation in 2019 was something that I knew was a word, but I didn't really use much. And I found that, using it with other people, you sort of had to stop and explain it. And just in the supply chain world, the SBOM and cybersecurity world, the word has become very, very popular in a negative way, because, we currently have U.S. federal regulations requiring self-attestation, which as soon as you hear that, I know in your head you think the same thing everybody else does. It's like, that sounds like someone saying, oh, trust me, I swear I really did, right? So we're literally, creating mechanisms right now to get companies like those who provide critical systems to the healthcare industry or communications industry to just tell us, please, that you think you really did put that stuff in there and take responsibility in case that's not true later, right? When I'm talking about need, I mean, that when a camera breaks and falls on a public highway because the bracket wasn't welded correctly, it's not an 18-month process, that involves, literal lawyers with literal, cardboard boxes full of files, which happens to this day. It's resolved immediately, because the first person on scene can scan a little mark that smart devices, smart metalworking devices now can put on batches or individual pieces of metal, like a bracket, and see every single thing they should see at that point, which in a case like that would be, for example, the major contractor. This is a real use case. I won't mention them at the moment, but you all know their name. You're feds. You work with them. You have a commitment to the Federal Transportation Authority, to have the attestations from your subcontractors that today are done by a cell phone and a camera taking pictures and being emailed to someone, which isn't very particularly effective, and be able to respond with those if requested under conditions such as your bloody camera just fell because the bracket wasn't good and it hit a car. And you need to see those right this moment. So as we look at the information, the direction of the information systems as represented by cybersecurity, we see incremental steps that are leading, I think, to whether it's literally the digital bill of materials open source project or some other automated open attestation ecosystem, where we can take not just information, not just everything I'm saying today, but when one of you says, Chris, what I need to know right now because I need to act on this information, what exactly is this? And I give you the answer. Now I'm attesting to something. The actionable information. How do we tie all that together so that here is a very current example just this week in the SBOM world. The FCC is requiring a QR code on smart medical devices that will allow whoever the valid customer to scan that and get from the supplier the software bill of material and the hardware bill of material and other pertinent information. This is most likely going to be an extremely interesting CISA sub-working group, or we're calling tiger teams or manatee mounds or platypus pods or whatnot, they'll run through July and August, to try to define what, the private sector and public sector can figure out is a useful step in that direction. So we're going down this path where 10 years, 20 years, 30 years out, as we look at case by case, someone responding to some request or some need for information, they get all of it all the way back at once at the speeds we're used to with everything else, right? So I see we're so 35 minutes or so forth into this, and I'm hoping we have an interesting conversation at that. So I will move into the last looking forward, right? And so the images there, to be clear, those are the top one is the trail, the vapor trail of the Starlink rocket, SpaceX rocket in front of the moon from my solar powered robotic boats that are waiting for me down in Florida at the moment, just a week or so ago. And at the bottom, for those of you who are space geeks like me, Flappy, right? SpaceX recently launched this monstrous stainless steel water tower around the world, which had a flap burned through but still landed standing upright in the Indian Ocean. My point being that we solve complicated things all the time, and I think the more than anything, we again, and hope we get into some of these back and forth with in the Q&A. There are lots of specific things we need to work on and complain about and so forth right now. However, right, we're going down a path that I think is fundamentally winnable, and in the long sweep of history will be one. I think transparency outcompetes secrecy and closed systems and corruption just does, literally on a biological scale. I think long periods of time, but I don't plan to actually live that long, so I'd like to see things change myself. So in the short term, my recommendation, lean into our fundamental. This sort of background I hear from a lot of my friends. How do I respond? How do we get back at all the sources of disinformation? My short answer is we can't. We don't. Right? That requires the sort of scale of an organization that the Obama campaign in 2008 spontaneously generated, that large amounts of cash can just buy. So in short of large scale or systemic approaches like the disarm structure, I think Pablo Brower talked to the same crowd about that just recently. Thinking about that, there are things to do. However, I think the main advantage is to lean into transparency. I think the modern world, the vast majority of the modern world, and since the particularly U.S. audience, we literally as a country, this is our entire premise. Openness, rules, strategy, the right people. Openness, transparency doesn't mean that everybody gets to see everything. We've been down that road in cybersecurity. Sharing all threat intelligence doesn't mean that look, appropriate people should be able to get appropriate information now, so that they can move on and save time and make decisions and go forward. It's better, faster, cheaper. Capitalize on opportunities to advance transparency in systems, right? So the software bill of materials is a good example of that, right? I'm looking to be disproven in this one, so don't take me too seriously in the future. But I think some of the structures are evolving out of the needs to just deal with and transport that information in an actual useful way. Gives us opportunities to look at structures, technologies and policy structures that can work, in advancing transparency, even in social media platforms and the cliche, unsolvable problems of today. And I don't think this has to be, I think it in fact can't be in any way an ideological or partisan thing. And I don't think it, in any way needs to be. Nobody, again, my dear friends are all across the political spectrum. I have people that believe all of it, down to reptile aliens and so forth. But they're good folks. They don't like being wrong. They don't like being wrong, right? And folks like transparency, right? Skip to that last one. But this is when I really dig into what I mean by inevitability curves. So much of it comes down to what just folks want and don't want. I think as we push further to various edges, just general aggregate resistance just piles up. And it's inefficient and it clogs up systems. Again, whether it's aside from any moral, ethical issues, it's just not a competitive path. So in finding the economic benefits, And again, I think this, can't be overstated enough in any sort of community that focused on security, because, as a specific community, we have very specific characteristic flaws in this space. More generally, enthusiasts and technical people and so forth have, share a broader set of flaws in this space. But, ours is to say, look, I told in the private sector, I told the board of directors that they're a bunch of idiots and they're bad people if they don't spend all this money on security. And they said no. So I'm right and they're wrong. That's lovely, right? Didn't help, right? You didn't get the budget. You didn't make a good argument. We don't have the money. We're exposed. We can't do our job and protect whatever it is we're supposed to protect. To find the economic benefit, Stuart Phillips, who is great speakers for always talk to a group like this in the turn of the century at Cisco, he was the one that changed our marketing message. To be clear, you'd rather not have lower cost and higher competitiveness. Virtual private networks were a big thing at the time, and our fixed firewalls and our iOS router firewalls supported IPsec VPNs. And even though, frankly, a lot of these benefits weren't realized until much later, during the pandemic, obviously, everybody, knows what VPN means. But the argument was the remote workers have lower cost and work longer hours, so therefore more productive and profitable, making you more competitive. So you need a firewall. Instead of, there's a lot of bad people out there and you should be really afraid of them. You should buy a firewall. Our firewall is better than other people's because our encryption is 256 longer than the Hootie Hots, right? Find the economic benefits that drive transparency, and you find opportunities to get things done. So with that, Fred, I will say,
Thank you.
Not my share.
Fascinating. So if you have questions, raise your hand in the chat box. But until somebody else has a question, I get to ask them, which is one of my favorite things. And you should try to stop sharing. There you go. Perfect. So, the first question, your overall conclusion has to do with time to transparency. And I want to talk specifically about influence operations, because the thing about influence operations is if they're trying to get the truth out, then transparency is a really good thing. If you're trying to lie, transparency is a huge problem.
Right.
So much of the influence operations space, I won't say it's necessarily about lying, but let's say it's about selective focus of attention, right? And getting your message out. You look at the conflict right now in the Middle East and the ability of Hamas and the Palestinian supporters to push out these messages over a long time scale by influencing the educational system with money and so forth. The transparency issue seems to be huge. And one of the prime examples here was this hospital where rockets from one of the groups hit the hospital, actually didn't hit the hospital, hit the parking lot outside the hospital. And the claim was that all these people died because Israel had targeted the hospital. And it took Israel a day to actually, determine definitively had not hit the hospital. And in that day, that meme settled in and it's there. It's really hard to displace. So can you talk about how time to transparency can be turned into a mechanism that automatically helps to countervene these sorts of things?
Well, right. So there's a classic old quote that Terry Pratchett fans will appreciate. The lie can get around the world before the truth can get its boots on, right? So that's the hack. How the truth putting its boots on takes a finite amount of time and a predictable amount of time. If we can lower that time, then a lie has to run faster. And we're not talking about solving all the world's problems and getting everyone to agree. And in examples like you state, like sometimes it takes a competent authority a little bit of time to actually say, wait, which was it blue or red? I don't know. I'm hearing blue. It should be blue, but it could be red. Honestly, you got to check. So you're necessarily going to be behind. However, right, that's just life, and it's always been there. What we have right now, again, is stable, mechanized systems for propagating messages on a massive scale, right? And what's interesting I mean, you shared an article just yesterday, I think, and it was a study looking at the predicting impact of large language models on this topic, right? And it turns out, I think, in particularly in micro targeting, it's not any help at all, effectively, right? In macro targeting, it could be, but so that what we can change and what I think has to change. I think we have an unstable situation where the advantage is way too much on one side and the other, and nature just abhors that sort of thing over time. But the unstable situation we have is that for nefarious actors, the sky's the limit. You can pump as much information out as faster than you can think about it. I mean, AI will amplify that. However, I think that we're at a saturation point. So if you look at anyone in an emerging area, somebody as I have done, as you have done, and some of the folks in attendance, probably been involved in this sort of things. When everybody's adopting firewalls, and you're there, right? At first it's easy, right? I'll never forget, literal running out of fax paper because the orders just come in. Just people I've never even spoken to were just faxing orders for firewalls. I have to talk. I think it's harder and harder along the way as you saturate the market. I think, over the timeline I've discussed, we've gone to, pure saturation. Every single one of us is not just embedded in a soup of disinformation, but we know it. Everybody. Everybody you disagree with, they know it too. They think it's a different source, perhaps, but we can't get more. If you produce 10,000 times more disinformation, it wouldn't make any difference because we're already saturated. So I think the natural resonant swing, is to go the other direction. I think it's as it takes more and more energy to give the next incremental benefit in one direction, it's less of a competitive advantage. And as I've said, I think transparency mechanisms. I think it's not just about this issue. I think our basic premise as a national culture and as a modern civilization, that transparency is just cheaper. It's just faster. It takes less time. It takes less money. I do less things. I can, outcompete, at the micro level, right? As a small business to the other small businesses, and again, to your premise, in the short term, people will tend to have advantages. In the emergence, the rebels always have that short term advantage, but that sort of thing can be dealt with in normal human systems, whereas the delta of disadvantages that exists has been too broad for anyone defending anything to do anything about it.
So now, long before the Obama campaign, you had a lot of effort that you put into the social media space, or media isn't the right word for it. But my recollection is you had I think it was a mailing list or a group or whatever it was that had hundreds of thousands or maybe up millions of people. Can you just talk about the philosophical difference that you put into place that allowed you to expand very rapidly?
Well, okay, right. I think you're referring to, I think it was the open source group on LinkedIn. At the time, I think 120,000 people or 75,000 people. It was a big group, right? And I had gotten involved in it for God knows whatever reason, and it was just a spam fest, right? And I forget exactly how, but anyways, I ended up being responsible for it. I somehow ended up being the admin for the thing. Made some really clear, talked to a couple folks, who were, spending a lot of time there, got an opinion, made some really, really clear rules, created a system of self-electing and self-enforcing moderators, and cleaned it right up, right? And it, went on. There were hundreds of thousands of people on it last I looked. I really haven't, had a touch on it. But you're right. I have over and over in my career, even before the computer career, I philosophically believe these things. Right? I think that, again, it's not. I think it is right. I think it is ethical and moral and makes the world a better place. However, doesn't matter if it's better, faster, cheaper. I think transparency and honesty and openness and so forth just work better. What the heck? I'll share the story in this. Protego is we did the Sim startup with my friends, and we did a Silicon Valley VC pitch. The first time I ever did it, I gave the slides, and one of the investors sitting at the table leaned forward and said, "That $1 billion Cisco thing you just did, how did you do that?" And I said, "Well, we built a team that would die for each other, We took responsibility in the market, openly took the opportunity to take a, bullet to the shoulder, right? That was our fault, totally screwed up, with, transparency, build trust. And the investor leaned forward and said, no, seriously, you can tell me, right? I think there's just so much disbelief that any of this, apple pie American fundamental philosophical stuff, is naivete. But I think the existence of the internet, I think the 2008 Obama campaign, I think there's plenty of examples. And I, go through cybersecurity, for all sorts of technology adoptions where, we made security better because it lowered the costs. It's a great thing because it was cheaper and faster and they had better transparency in the one of the first firewall sale they did, the early 90s was an aerospace company that had a location in Canada, location in the States, and one in Hong Kong, and 56K dedicated ISDN or whatever they had lines, frame relay lines or something at the time. And they asked, this internet thing is going to be, how, security, how do we do that? And I said, well, security ends is at least as good as what you have right now. Any technician along the way with a monitor, can just listen to your traffic. It's just some physical connection somewhere. And heck, you could probably encrypt it, right? VPNs, right? So you get better visibility, better control, and you save, in that case, thousands of dollars a month just by getting internet connections and buying my product.
So that has a tendency to work better, faster, cheaper. There's another question I have here. So one of the interesting things about your description of the, we'll call it eating cats versus feeding cats controversy is that this, the OODA loop here, right? The Boyd cycle, you got really good feedback on what was happening. And the really good feedback is really central to any sort of an influence campaign operating properly. And it's also central to trying to measure the effect of a campaign, incrementally as you do things. Did this work or not? So can you talk a little bit about, that the measurement aspect of it? And, you had this amazing measurement capability because you had, thousands and thousands of people who were just looking at it and telling you about it all the time, fused together in the old mechanical way. And it likens me back to, like Germany, World War II, where there was all pieces of paper, right? And people were taking notes on things and feeding it into a tremendous system where people processed pieces of paper in multiple copies and sent them to the right places. Automation is supposed to solve that, but to a large extent, it has done the opposite.
Well, it's, this is the difference in these eras I talked about, right? In 2008, it was, and again, I'm trying not to take credit for anything. I think, somebody else, anyways, they, could have been in the right place at the right time. And there were other people involved in the core of the rapid response team. But I love this stuff, right? I can just, if I stare at something long enough, in the 2000s, the early turn of the century, I could literally tell you down to an incredible level of detail who's going to be buying which firewalls, what size, and what plot in every spot in the world. And as you say, in 2008, there was this system, and the feedback, it wasn't just that, someone in central command can say, hey, tell everybody to talk to all the journalists and tell them this, is that it was bidirectional, fast. You'd hear from, we'd be constantly soaking up, the negative stories in that particular morning. It's like, oh my God, this is horrible. I don't think I should be here cat eating. I thought he was a nice guy. And we, like see different messages being tried and so forth and failing or working or not working or partly working. So at that point, and Steve Bannon is an extremely smart individual. I couldn't disagree with him more on everything. But to our point here, if you had, a couple folks in the right place, the right time at that point, staring at this really hard with the tools available at the time, you could figure out enough of this, to help guide the overall system. Cambridge Analytica and that era, over the next 5 or 10 years after that, we really mechanized a lot of that. The micro-targeting market, and again, the stuff that we're just built into all our devices right now, and if we actually saw the alternative, we want it back. That became a thing. So now you're taking input at tremendous speed, and you're correlating it at tremendous speeds in predictable, repeatable ways by machine processes, as opposed to a committee, individuals or a committee of folks, putting it all together in their heads.
All right. Well, it's been another fascinating hour, but we do have to end it. I hope that people are able to see my shared screen now for next month's brown bag. The date, it's not quite tentative, it's almost certain, but Wednesday, July 17th, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, Influence Operations Impact Assessments, where Major Kara Masick will be talking about how you do assessments, how you figure out whether it worked or not. So we look forward to seeing you all. It's the same dial-in, and you'll get the same process for knowing that the thing exists and so forth. In the meanwhile, I just want to thank everybody for participating. And if you have any more questions, you can get in touch with Chris. We'll help you connect with him. I think his email is Christopher Blask, all one word, Blask @gmail.com. That's the easy way, right?
That works.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. And I think as the saying goes, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Thanks, folks.